Good morning. Bernard-Henri Lévy is a philosopher, an activist, a filmmaker, a playwright, the author of more than 30 books, including The Genius of Judaism, Barbarism with a Human Face, and Who Killed Daniel Pearl. His writing appears in publications throughout Europe and the US, and his documentaries include Peshmerga, The Battle of Mosul, The Oath of Tobruk, and Bosna. He's co-founder of the anti-racist group SOS Racisme and has served on diplomatic missions for the French government. Good morning.
Good morning.
I like people to get a feel for the person behind the ideas and the books and so on that we're going to talk about. In preparing for this, I see you regularly called, intellectual, public intellectual. I don't think of intellectuals normally as going undercover in war zones and making documentaries about dark subjects. How do you think of yourself? And just briefly, what has been your path to the kind of work you do today?
First of all, I am a honest intellectual. I hope to be. Honest means when I speak, I want to see first. I want to be witness of what I advance. So before writing about human rights, before writing about indignity that strikes a part of the world, I am always happy to go and see. That's why I spent all my life going to the most dirtiest place in the world. When I made my book about Daniel Pearl, my investigation about the death of Daniel Pearl, called Who Killed Daniel Pearl, it was very clear for me. I was, like all Westerners, shocked by the beheading of this brave, young American hero. I had the feeling that something very important and very decisive was going on, that it might be the start of something. It was just after September 11 and just after the death of Afghan Commander Massoud. I felt that. But before saying it, I wanted to be sure. So I spent 1 year of my life going back and forth in Pakistan in order to understand what happened, why he was killed, why the new Al-Qaeda did humiliate, torture, and kill a Jew, an American, a journalist in this time. So for me, it's a question of honesty. When I speak, I want to know. In order to know, you have to go when you can, when you are in good health, and when you are strong as I am, when you go forward, you have to go on the ground.
Very good. I want to start right away with today's headlines, So I read a piece in the Boston Globe, I assume it was distributed many places, by you 2 days ago, called The Real National Emergency. And let me read 2 lines, and then I want you to fill in the rest, okay? So one, just regarding Trump's vision, he writes, "The dreamers, whose real plan is to embrace the values in the credo of American exceptionalism, are in Trump's eyes representative of a colossal enemy straddling the Rio Grande." Okay, that's what Trump sees. But your larger point is about the actual meaningful threats that are being ignored by this distraction. And you say this tragicomedy has occurred at the very moment that, and I'll let you fill in what's happening at this very moment.
At the very moment when happens what I describe in my book, The Empire and the Five Kings, which is the threat by 5 really bad guys, the threat exerted by 5 really enemy states, which are China, Russia, Turkey, Sunni Arab Islam, and Iran. This is so crazy to see your administration waving the red flag of the national emergency for a few dreamers wanting to cross Rio Grande at the very moment where you have Putin wanting to cross every borders of decency and of honesty by invading us by fake news, propaganda, and so on. At the very moment when you have Iran who is extending its empire in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Damascus, in Syria, in the rest of the area, at the very moment where you have Erdogan, who is in principle our ally, but who is cheating us, humiliating us, mocking us, and dreaming to build a new form of the old Ottoman Empire at the expense of his own citizens and at the expense of us, Europeans and Americans. And China, come on. Of course China is a real danger. And what is the reaction of the West and of America? China has a vision for 20 years, for half of a century. China is like Vatican, like the Catholic Church, acting at the scale of century. And we are responding by tariff regulation worked for 6 months. It's a joke. So we have a real state emergency, and it is as if we did not pay attention to them, and we have a mock national emergency, which is like a smoke of screen, which is this supposed national emergency on the Rio Grande. My thesis in the book, in the Empire and the Five Kings, is that the real wall, the dangerous wall, the wall that scares me, is the wall which is more and more in the imagination of and that breaks my heart, imagination of so many American citizens, the wall on the Atlantic and the wall on Pacific. Today, you have a lot of Americans who imagine that they are behind a fortress, that they have to cut themselves from the rest of the world, that they have to break ropes with Europe, that they have to break their commitment with the rest of the planet, and who are transforming the two oceans, who were an opening to the rest of the world, the two oceans, transforming them into sort of barriers, sort of barricades, separating America from the rest of the world. This is, for me, the tragic mistake of United States in these current times.
Hasn't that strain, though, of isolating America been, and when you say you have many Americans, I think it is a small percentage that feels what you were saying. And hasn't that small percentage hasn't there always been an isolationist strain here? Isn't it just cyclical?
It is cyclical. There has always been an oscillation between isolationism and creed and moxie and will to, okay. Now, my feeling, the thesis of my book is that it is a little more than one of these cyclical moments. I think this is a demonstration of the Empire and the Five Kings, that something is happening in the depth of this society, in the relationship between America and Europe, in the DNA. Sometimes, even for your human being, you can break a DNA. A DNA can be broken, and it generally produces some monsters, by the way. When you break the chain of a DNA, it produces some genetic catastrophes. I think that there is at least an attempt to break the DNA of America, which is much more than just another oscillation. And which is, by the way, beyond Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump, there is only Mr. Trump to believe that Mr. Trump is America. Of course. America is not Trump, and Trump is not America. America is much bigger than Mr. Trump. The only man who believes that Trump is America is Trump in his egomaniac mood. Okay? So there is something which is much more important, which I analyze in my book, which is a big wave, a big stream in the depth, in the bottom of your national consciousness, and that produces this new rule of the game, which scares me.
You say that, one thing that you say is that in the book is that Barack Obama, also had some of these feelings that some of his actions showed that he was beginning this retreat and that it preceded Trump?
I don't think, first of all, I was, and I'm still am, an admirer of Barack Obama. I was probably, for the record, one of the first European for sure, and maybe one of the first in general to announce in a piece in the Atlantic. It was in October 2004. I wrote a piece called A Black Clinton, where I announced that he will be elected President of America and that I wished it. Okay?
This was following his speech at the convention in 2004.
It was following his speech at endorsement of John Kerry. I spent a day with him the day after. He was very free at this time. Few journalists were interested in him. We spent a great day. I was so impressed by this cool, brilliant, courageous, and so on man. So I want that to be clear. Number two, Trump and Obama share a difference in every regards. They share nearly nothing. They have nothing in common, except one point. Except one point, and this is the point that you are just underlining. The only point on which they agree is that America is no longer the chosen country that it was for the Pilgrim Father who invented it throughout the 19th century and throughout more or less most of the 20th century. This sense of chosenness, this sense of exceptionality, this sense of shining city upon the hill, which I believe in myself, which American people believed in for centuries. I think that the only thing in common with the two have is that they consider it is an old story, not matching with modernity. That's why I would not say that it started with Obama. It started probably before. But when President Obama, with all the admiration and the respect I have for him, when in 2013, 6 years ago, he said, in front of the crimes of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, there is a red line. The red line is the use of the chemical weapons, which are forbidden by all international treaties. If you cross this red line, there will be consequences. And when Bashar al-Assad did cross the red line, and when there was no consequences, I believe that a shift happened, that something very serious happened in the system of deterrence, in the system of credibility of America regarding the rest of the world. And yes, between these two presidents who are so different, there is this in common.
Okay. This new book, what was if there is an inciting incident, a moment when you said, that's the book I've got to write next, this is what I've got to give the next year or so to, what was that, and what do you hope to accomplish?
There was a moment where I decided to spend for writing this book, not the years, because it is a book of emergency, written in emergency, and I wrote it in a few months. The moment was October 2017. What happened in October 2017? In a sense, nothing. Seen from Los Angeles or from Paris, nothing. For me, who were on the ground, something huge. In a few words, I was in Kurdistan. I was with my old friends, the Kurdish fighter, the Peshmerga, with whom I had been embedded for the 2 last years to make a documentary movie. They were the best allies of the West. They were the boots on the ground of the State Department and of our State Departments. They were those who protected us Americans and Europeans from terrorism. We had a huge debt to them. And in October 2017, the French, the Europeans, the Americans said, ISIS is over. And the first thing we did, instead of rewarding them, instead of thanking them, and instead of endorsing a little referendum they made at this time, I don't enter into details, the first thing we did was to abandon them, to drop them flat, to betray them, and to offer their head, like in Roman antiquity, on the silver plate to their Iranian and Turkish enemies. This was the event. I was there. I saw on the faces of my Kurdish friends such a surprise, such a distress. They did not even understand what happened. And for me, to see the Turks, to see the Iranians, to see the Muslim Brotherhood, to see Putin, to see China, taking advantage of our sending our allies to hell and to fuck, taking advantage of our pushback to occupy the space and to fill the vacuum, it was like a warning call. I thought something is happening here and I have to write about it. It's much beyond the Kurds. The Kurds is just an epiphenomenon. It is much beyond them. There is, in the order of the world, a huge movement which is starting, a huge tide back of America, a tide going back, and a huge push of these 5 bad guys, these 5 states wanting to become empires, who are Turkey, China, Russia, etc., etc. And for me, I was bred in and grown in Latin and Greek culture, Jewish culture, and Greco-Latin culture. And I know that in the antiquity, you had events like that, little battles. The battle of Cheronea, for example, where you saw the Macedonian Empire broken by the Roman Empire, by Roma. It was just a little event of nothing. Nobody paid attention of this time, but it was a real game changer at the scale of humanity. You had before that the little battle, it was the Battle of Pydna between Roma and the Macedonian Empire, Pydna. Just before the Battle of Cheronea, a few centuries ago, where you had the defeat of the Greeks in front of the Macedonians. It was, again, a little thing. The order of the world was moving. So what gave the start of my new book, The Empire and the 5 Kings, was the feeling that I was the eyewitness of a new Battle of Cheronea, of a new Battle of Pydna, of a new Battle of Leuctra, which is, on one side, at first look, a tiny battle, but which has huge butterfly effects all over the world. I saw the order of the world moving completely around himself, and this is why I started this book in this state of personal emergency and wanting to alert my human brothers in America, in Europe, for what was happening. And the depiction of that, of the new state of affairs, the depiction of the new relationship of force between America and the 5 Kings, the depiction of the arm wrestling we are losing against people who hate not only us, who hate our values, who hate equality between men and women, who hate secularism, who hate political correctness. The description of this arm wrestling which we are losing is the book.
Very good. There are 2 strands in the book that I want to touch on. One is, it's as you just described, it's the twin movements of the U.S. pulling back. And as you were doing that action, I thought, there's another meaning of recession, right? We talk about financial recessions, but this is a recession of power. the America moving back as these five kings, these five powers have ambitions and are moving forward. How would the story be different if they were ambitious but we were not retreating?
If they were ambitious and we were not retreating, it would be the old story of deterrence, of balance of powers. It would be the old story familiar to Republicans and Democrats in this country. It's not a question of blue or red. We are speaking beyond political choice. It was the situation of America in front of the Soviet Union for so long. You had to face such a situation with a huge power, which was the Soviet one, with big ambition, except that it could be Jimmy Carter or Ronald Reagan, it could be George Bush or it could be Richard Nixon or John Fitzgerald Kennedy. There was a deterrence. There was a balance of power. There were red lines. There was a rule of the game. America was credible. When America said, beware, be careful, America was heard and taken seriously. This is the point. Today, I'm obliged to say, and again, I am a friend of this country, as you probably know. I said it so often, that I am anti-American, that I believe that anti-Americanism is part of the European fascism, and that I would not be born, I would not exist without America, without the bravery of American soldiers who 75 years ago liberated my country. So no doubt on that. But I must say that today, when Mr. Trump makes agitation, gesticulation in front of, he's just not taken seriously. He is not taken seriously by Kim Il-jong in North Korea. He is not taken seriously by Erdogan in Turkey. How could he be? One day he says that Erdogan, all the documents are in my book, has guts, and that he's more serious than all his European allies, and that there is much more to deal with Erdogan than with Macron, because Erdogan belongs, for Trump, to the club of the big guts. I hate this way of wording politics, but that's the way, alas, your president speaks. He belongs to the club of the big guts, to the club of the testosterone, so he feels brotherly to and the other day, he says to Erdogan, you should deliver the Christian pastor, and you will have the fire of the sky. Erdogan says, go to hell. At the end of the day, he liberated the pastor, of course, because he had to, because the pastor was innocent, and so on. But what would happen if America was there is that the five kings would exist, but would be contained. And the second thing which would happen if America was still here, did not abdicate, is that in these countries, in Turkey, for example, you have a lot of decent ladies and gentlemen who believe in human rights, who believe in democracy, who believe in equality between women and men, and who wait and starve for support, for moral support at least, for encouragement. They starve for signs showing to them that they are not alone. They would feel that if we did not abdicate. But we abdicate, and therefore they have the sentiment to live in the darkest night possible.
I would feel that I was skipping over something if I didn't ask you to, when you're saying whether it was Nixon or Kennedy, whether it was or Johnson, that we drew red lines, that we acted on them. We did a lot of things that I would think everyone in this room would hope we hadn't done. How do you integrate that?
Me too, my friend. I spent all my youth demonstrating in the streets of Paris of Berlin and elsewhere when I was 17, 18, 19 years old against the Vietnam War, I see myself demonstrating against the American napalm in Vietnam, and I would do exactly the same today. I remember about the dirty American operations in Latin America, in Chile, and so on. Of course, America is not an angelic country. America did mistakes, huge mistakes, but it did also good. There is the two. Being a liberal, being a leftist, of course I take acknowledge of Chile and of Vietnam, but I cannot forget that without America, Nazism would have prevailed all over Europe. You defeated America. I cannot forget that you defeated communism, Stalinism and communism, which is another form of fascism. I cannot forget that. I cannot forget, this is Ronald Reagan. You can, maybe if I were American, I would not have voted for Ronald Reagan, but being honest, I must say that he's one of those who, at the end of a long process, gave the coup de grace to the Soviet Empire, which was a terrible one. And I cannot forget that when I was in Sarajevo, under the bombs of the Serbian fascists, among the children who were shot like rabbits by the snipers upon the hills, upon the dark hills, not the shining hills, surrounding Sarajevo, those who decided that enough was enough, and that we should save the children, and that we should save the bodies, and that we should say no, no, and no to the killers of the Serbian army, they were the Americans. So, for me, I'm not saying that there is a balance. It's always hard to make a balance. But what I would say is that all countries do mistakes. All powerful countries make big mistakes. But there is a difference between a powerful country doing mistakes and caring about nothing, having no creed, just acting according to its self-interest, and a country like America that does mistakes, that does big mistakes because it is a big country, but that has a creed, that has some values, and that from time to time, and in general, in the big circumstances, Nazism, Serbian fascism, and so on, acts accordingly to this creed and to these great values. It makes a difference.
Very good. Let's turn to Europe for a second. A few weeks ago, you were one of 30 writers. In fact, you were one of the main organizers of a pro-European manifesto ahead of the European Parliament elections that are upcoming, in which you called this a battle of civilization. How did that come about? What is your, what's going on there?
This is in the book also. You will find all the details of that. I believe that there is a clash of civilization. Not the clash which was announced by one of your intellectuals, dead now, peace to the dead, I don't want to enter in polemic. Not this sort of clash, no. A clash inside the Western world, between fascists and anti-fascists, between populists and Democrats. This is a clash of civilization. You have also a clash, by the way, inside the Muslim world, between enlightened Islam and democratic Islam. It's also a clash. As you remember, it was the word of Samuel Huntington saying that there was a clash between the West and the rest. No, there is a clash in the West, and there is a clash in the rest. Inside the West, inside the rest. This is the theory of the empire and the five kings. Inside the West, the clash is, yes, between this new neo-fascism, which is called, with pudor, populism, but populism is a nickname for new fascism, and this new fascism is pushing strong all over the European countries. I don't know if I can enter into details here, but in Italy, in my country, in France, with Marine Le Pen and so on, you have these European fascists have a strong ally. Him, you know him well. He's a wanted man here in Los Angeles. His name is Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon, since he is discredited in America, has found a new play, a new field of play, a field of game, which is Europe. He's campaigning all Europe, Steve Bannon, the dark guy, the emissary of Donald Trump, in order to ignite the fire of this national fascism in Europe, in Italy, in France, in Hungary, in Poland, and so on. So this manifesto, which you quoted, was an attempt, modest because we are just 30 writers, but among some of the ones who joined me are honestly among the best. But this manifesto was a way to say stop. Stop to Steve Bannon, hands off Europe. Stop to this populist movement, cool down. And a call, an appeal to the liberal, to the Democrats, the Republicans, in the French term, of the right and of the left. I'm a leftist, but it's not a matter of knowing left, making this difference. All the Republicans of the two banks, of the two sides, have to be united against this new fascism. This is the purpose of my manifesto.
Two quick things. One, you say Bannon went over there after he was discredited here. One could say he went over after he won here, after he was victorious here, and went to spread the message.
Exactly, exactly.
Is there a fear that when a bunch of writers come up and say, we must battle this, that the populists say, see, elites. I mean, in fact, it's like, that's just another reason, you know, to go the other way.
Okay, but you cannot always be on the defense. You cannot always act according to what the enemy will say. Okay, they will say elite, but Michelangelo was elite. Norman Mailer was elite. Philip Roth was elite. Cy Twombly was elite. The biggest artists, the biggest writers of our common history were elite. So, as for myself, that's also a topic, one of the points of my book. I refuse the blackmail on elites. I refuse this blackmail. There is good elites and bad elites. Steve Bannon is member of the elite, but he's a disgusting elite. Okay? You have today academics, scholars, intellectuals, militants of human rights in America who belongs to elite, but for me they are good elites. I'm sorry. And this is so crystal clear that we should not let this evidence be darkened by those crooks of the anti-elite and populist movement. Thanks God there is elites in democracy. And they have to be well-deserved elites. They have to be elites gained by merit, by achievements, and so on. But in this case, these 30 writers you are quoting, they have not been given their authority by the sky, or they did not steal their authority. They gained it because they enriched the imaginary, the dreams, the life of so many millions of people throughout the world, because they're the best writers. These elites, I bless them, and everyone should bless them.
One thing that I didn't see much of in the book, and I do want to question, is you condemn the populists as neo-fascists, but you speak very little of the possible appeal, or I would say the appeal that the populists make to the failures of the neoliberal approach, of market fundamentalism, of the wealth going to the wealthiest and the middle classes treading water, losing ground, losing hope. How does that play into it for you?
Yes, I speak little of that in the book, and because it is not the topic of the book. It was not the topic of the book, but I could elaborate on that. I do believe that I am a believer in markets. I don't think that humanity has invented yet a way of governing the trades of goods and the circulation of information and so on different than the market. I don't think there was one attempt to bypass the market, which was communism, and it proved to be a disaster. So I am a believer in market, but not jungle, not 100% free market, not market left to its own rules and to its own craziness. Market alone becomes crazy. That's why, without being what you call in America a socialist, I believe strongly in the intervention of the state. I believe strongly in the intervention of the institutions, not only state. In Europe, for example, I believe in the EU because I believe that only a supranational institution can oblige our 27 countries to respect some elementary human rights, which is the most elementary human rights is the right not to live with $10 a day. Yeah. This is a human right. Elementary human rights is the right to have a shelter at night. We have in Europe so many people, and in America, and in Los Angeles, in some areas of Los Angeles, where you have some homelesses who are, I saw that with my eyes when I wrote American Vertigo a few years ago, hunted by policemen on horse with whips like this. I saw and filmed that. This is unbearable, unsustainable, unworthy of a democracy, unworthy of a market guided by principle of democracy. So, of course, this is not of the book. It is in other books. It could be in the book. It can be in the next one. I'm a strong believer in what we call in France social democracy, welfare state. And that is why in America I supported so strongly, for example, the not limited efforts of the previous administration of Obama to try to extend the right, for example, not to be ill without care and so on. He did a lot, not enough, and as you know, it is in the process of being undone by.
I do want to touch with one. I read something in the American Conservative recently. You may have seen it. It was a response to your letter, and this gentleman said, "But if you really care," I'm paraphrasing, "if you really care about European values and what Europe has given to the world, these populists who want to keep the migrants out are actually more likely to stand for true Europe." You know what I'm saying. You know it's the criticism.
But they are just stupid because Europe means hospitality. One of the founding principles of Europe, same in America, one of the founding rocks of the American creed is hospitality. Not 100% open hospitality. Of course, hospitality, there are rules of hospitality for those who host, for those who are hosted, and so on. But hospitality, when you pretend to, when you close your country, when you dream of a pure European race or Europe or American race, I'm sorry, you fall in the nativism. In America, we have our form of nativism in Europe, and nativism ends always in a way or in another in crime, in criminal acts.
I think I want to turn it over to questions from the audience in a couple of moments. Let me ask two questions together. One is, what most these days gives you hope, and what would you say people should do?
What gives me hope is that Donald Trump will not make his wall. What gives me hope is that the Senate resists to his crazy attempt to distract the attention from Putin to the dreamers. The Senate resists this pathetic attempt. What gives me hope is that when he declares nevertheless national emergency, there is, I think, 16 states who seriously think of suing him for hijacking and mocking and cartoonizing the very serious notion of national emergency. This gives me hope. It means that American democracy is, of course, not dead, and more than that, more vibrant than ever. This gives me hope.
Okay. And what people...
To pursue this way, to encourage your state senators, your congressmen, your governors, and so on, to stand by their creed, to remember of the message coming throughout the age, sand throughout the age, like bottle in the sea of sand and of luxuriant vegetation of America by the founding fathers of America. There is a bottle which has been sent at the time of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and so on, and to remember of their message.
Okay, very good. Ted.
Thank you very much for brilliant analysis of the situation, and it's in evidence that philosophy can be also very practical. My question is, how do you view the role of the current government of Israel in positioning itself in that cultural shift in breach of values you've just described?
I am a Zionist. I am a strong defender of Israel. You thought about my activism on the ground at the beginning of our conversation. I could have added that at the end of the day, each time since 50 years, Israel was under attack, military attack, I was there with the Israelis, but I must say that I don't like the policy, the trend of the policy of the current government. And that I am heartbroken when I see so often the Prime Minister of Israel considering himself and appearing all over the world, not only as a friend, but sometimes as a godfather of all these illiberal leaders of Europe and elsewhere. That's not Israel. That's not Zionism. That's not why Israel was founded. But again, I told you that Trump was not America, and that there is only Trump to believe that America equates Trump. The same can be said about Israel. Netanyahu is not Israel. And there is only Netanyahu who thinks he is Israel. And Israel is far more big and far more solid than Netanyahu.
Both of them beholden to their base, though.
We'll see. These sort of bases are more fragile than we think. And they can shrink dramatically and very quick. Let's wait.
Thank you very much for, once again, a brilliant analysis. Should you be viewed as, in terms of your appreciation of America, as the next Tocqueville, or how would you compare yourself to him?
No, it would be too big an honor to make to me, and Tocqueville is a giant. What I can say is that your compliment over-flatters me, because I know rather well Tocqueville. And 15 years ago, I wrote a book called American Vertigo, which was in a sense the prologue of the Empire and Five Kings. Empire and Five Kings is the continuation of American Vertigo. American Vertigo was a book written in the footsteps of Alexis de Tocqueville. So for me, it's more than honey to my ears. I'm a great admirer of Tocqueville and a great admirer of the relationship of Tocqueville with this country. And if I could, you have, America is so blended, intermingled with France. You had Tocqueville, you had the Marquis de Lafayette before. At every moment of your history, you have had some French, Beaumarchais, great playwright and great French writer who delivered weapons to the American revolutionaries and so on. So, yes, I would like, when I am out of this world, I would like to be memorized by you as a modest, humble continuator of these great tradition of French who loved America and loved America for its best art. What did Tocqueville like in America? This is that I express in my book. Tocqueville loved two things in America. The creed, this idea of being a country based on values. He noticed that, and for him, this made the difference between so many between America and all American countries. And number two, the articulation between freedom and equality. What Tocqueville noticed and what made for him America so great again and again was this mix, this articulation of freedom and equality. It was this idea that it is because Americans are free that they can be equal. And it is because they are equal that they can be free. This was this miraculous conjunction of the two that struck Alexis de Tocqueville.
I want to follow quickly a question that I was going to ask before, which is, you took this trip in the footsteps of Tocqueville in California. What most surprised you in the 15 years following that you hadn't sensed, that you hadn't seen?
What surprises me most is Trump. Because those who read American Vertigo know that I sort of guessed Trump. I sort of guessed this deep undercurrent movement in the American society, but I could not imagine that it could take the face of Trump. This, for me, is the big surprise.
Is there a history of anti-intellectualism in this country that cripples us now, and how do we get back to the shining city?
Anti-intellectualism, you say?
Anti-intellectualism. Anti-intellectualism.
Yes, anti-intellectualism is always one of the components and maybe one of the rising sparks, first sparks of fascism. When you start with anti-intellectualism, it means hatred of ideas, hatred of beauty of art, beauties of literature, and so on. Simple nativist or identity politics. It is always the start of the worst. You are at this point, as we are at this point in France too, and in Europe too. There is the same hatred of ideas, hatred of thought in France. How can we step out of that? By continuing to fight, by refusing to cede, to concede to discouragement, by continuing to fight inside our NGO, our civil society organization, our books, our teaching amphitheater, I don't know.
Events like this?
Events like this, yes. Events like this. I don't know if they are broadcasted or not, but yes, if your question, for example, was broadcasted throughout a bigger audience, and if my reply was broadcasted, which is that intellectuals must not be shy, must not be ashamed, but must not accept the blackmail, I would be happy. Those who have been ashamed are the people who believe that just being there, just being native of this place or this one, give them some rights. Those should be ashamed. The partisans of ideas, of complexity, of openness to the rest of the world, of working on oneself to fight inside ourselves the bad tendencies which we all have. We all have some reflexes of these are the salt of the earth, the American earth and the earth in general.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Yes, thank you. So this receding of the US that you described, in theory, to me, would create an opening for Europe to rise to maybe take some relay of some of these actions, this former role. What's your view of this?
Absolutely. It can be, it can be an opening for Europe. It can be an opportunity for Europe. It can be the act of baptism of this Europe of defense, which I advocate since so long and that cannot take form, of course. It can be that. But even if it was that, I think that the West, the world of democracies, has always walked on the 2 feet. The American foot and the European foot. And I would not like a world where the values of liberalism and democracy as endorsed only by America, but I would not like it either if they were endorsed only by Europe. I am an advocate of the transatlantic link. I remember of the time where the Pilgrims, Father of America, accosted to the shores of America with the idea of resuming, restarting, resetting a new Europe, better one, giving a more bright sense to the European values. But I like also the reverse. I like the idea of a Europe remembering its heritage and being also, for the rest of the planet, a shining city upon the hill. I like so much this idea of a shining city upon the hill that I like the idea that there is 2. There is place for 2 shining city upon the hill, America and Europe, and partnership between the 2.
And our final question for the morning.
Okay, thank you for that. We could see globally we've organized ourselves in many different ways across boundaries and many different layers, from government and the power resting there heavily, but through commerce and enterprise and through civil society and diaspora populations. I'm curious, when the government has so much undue influence and power, but is there a way to get these connected layers working better and in better balance?
Remember when your president decided to withdraw from the Paris Agreement about climate? This is one of the most burning issues of our time. You know that in California, you know what it means, the heating of the climate. You paid such a high price in your lives, in your families, in your houses for that. It's a very serious, one of the most serious issues of our time. When Donald Trump withdrew for the climate agreement, when he joined so publicly, so bluntly the camp of the so-called climato-sceptics who are just crooks and criminals, because this is a criminal way of thinking, what happened? Most of the big cities in America, many states, many civil forces, many billionaires and philanthropists replied to the call of my president, but it could be anyone, I'm not a chauvinistic, and they decided together to make the planet great again. So you have, thanks God, this is one of the advantages of democracy, is that it is never centralized in the hand of only one. And when the only one makes a huge mistake, you have a recourse. You have some check and balances, and you have ways to keep democracy vibrant and efficient nevertheless.
Okay.
Well, with that, thank you, BHL. Thank you, Terrence.